Welcome to the video training of gender identity. Before you get started, please make sure to turn on your sound and print out all materials needed for activities. Students will need the Gender Identity General Handout. Facilitators will need the Pronoun Game handout and the Common Questions handout. Please have these on hand before beginning the video training. Welcome to Gender Identity, the second of 3 sessions in University of Wyoming's Safe Zone program. If you have not taken LGB 101, we encourage you to do so before completing this session. These are the learning outcomes of this presentation. I'm not going to go over them, but you can pause them and read them if you would like. They will also be in the description of this video. Let's lay down some ground rules for the purpose of your group. Remember that you can pause the video at any time to facilitate discussion. In fact, it is highly encouraged. Rule 1 is to ask questions. Even though we're not there, someone can answer questions if you send us an email to safezone@uwyo.edu. Rule number 2 is Vegas rules, which means that what happens during this discussion stays in this room. Anyone and everyone should have the ability to learn and grow without fear of their stories being shared. However, you can take away the learning that happens with you. Rule number 3 is LOL, which stands for laugh out loud. Something funny might happen, and that's perfectly okay. Sometimes people laugh when they're uncomfortable and are processing a situation. It's good to laugh and process. Rule 4 is share the airtime. Everyone should have the opportunity to share their story. Rule 5 is that it's okay to change your mind. You might come across some information that leads you to think something differently after you have this discussion. That's okay. Rule number 6 is to challenge by choice. Nobody is required to share their personal stories or participate. Now, let's go over what LGBTQIA stands for. L stands for lesbian, G stands for gay, B stands for bisexual, T stands for trans or transgender, Q stands for queer or questioning, I stands for intersex, and A stands for asexual or agender. The plus means that there are other communities that are included that we don't explicitly name. In this presentation, we are focusing on the second half of the alphabet, the TQIA+. Now it's time for our first activity, the Pronoun Game. The activity is accessible on our website. If you are curious about pronunciation, ZIE is pronounced Z and replaces he or she, and HIR is pronounced here and replaces his or hers. Before you start, as a note on pronouns, never, ever call somebody it. A good rule of thumb is if you want to refer to somebody but don't know their gender, you can use they or just use their first name. It is grammatically correct and more polite than assuming someone's gender or using a word that refers to an object. You can pause the video and play this game now, then come back to the video once you've had a chance to discuss this activity. Now, understanding gender is hard, but there are a few different terms that you can use to help you. As a note, these terms are common, but by no means the only terms. The definitions also vary depending on who you talk to, so if you are wondering how a particular person defines these terms, ask them. The first term is biological sex. This refers to the sex that someone is assigned at birth. This is usually interpreted as male or female. But sex is much more complex than we give it credit for. Biological sex consists of 5 aspects: chromosomes, genitals, gonads, hormones, and secondary sex characteristics. There are many people who have one or more of these aspects appear ambiguous, either at birth or later in life, about 1 in 2,000 people. We associate particular characteristics with particular genders. For instance, a person with a vagina is interpreted at birth as being part of the female gender. However, this completely eliminates those people, remember, 1 in 2,000, who are born intersex. Sometimes surgeons or doctors soon after birth shape the genitalia of intersex children into a more typical penis or vagina in an attempt to give them more of a normal life. Additionally, there are many chromosomal anomalies that do not correspond with what we understand as typically male or typically female, such as the XXY chromosome. But people who have XXY are still people and still live full, healthy lives. All of this together just means that biological sex is as complicated as gender, just in a different way. And now we get to talk about gender. Gender is complicated, but remember biological sex? Biological sex serves as the indicator for the gender in which parents, friends, and society raise that child. They are not the same thing. Sex and gender are not the same thing. But if a child is born with a penis, usually they are raised within the confines of male gender. Further, gender is typically performed in that as you go about your day as a person, you are giving out social cues for others to understand what gender you operate within, as they are to you. Parallel to gender is gender identity. This refers to how somebody feels about themselves, but people who are not outside the gender binary and conform to male or female are considered to have a gender, while someone outside male and female is seen to have a gender identity. Do you see the distinction there? These terms are related, but are definitely treated differently. Please remember, these terms are about people's specific identities. These terms may mean different things to different people. Now we have 4 other major terms dealing with gender and how a person may identify within their gender to cover. The first is cisgender. A cisgender person is a person whose assigned biological sex at birth matches the gender that is associated with that sex. So if someone is born and assigned female based on their being born with a vagina, and they grow up to be a woman, then that person is a cisgender woman. The next term we're talking about is transgender. A transgender person is someone whose gender is different than the gender that is associated with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So if someone is born with a penis and testes and grows up to be a woman, that person is a transgender woman. She is a transgender woman. Transsexual is an older word that has fallen out of use. Some people do still use it, but it usually refers to transgender people who have had gender confirmation surgery. And no, don't let that be one of the first questions you ask a trans person. Essentially, even if you are a health professional, this term is not the first one to use. And lastly, gender fluid is a term that recognizes that people's gender can change. People's gender and their relationship to their gender changes over time. For some people, their relationship to their gender changes faster than other people's, and that's okay. Now, there are a couple of pieces of history about gender identity that are important to know. Christine Jorgensen was the first transgender American to receive gender confirmation surgery. She traveled to Denmark for her surgeries in 1951 and used her resulting fame to advocate on behalf of transgender Americans. The Stonewall riots occurred in 1969 and occurred because the police raided a Manhattan bar called the Stonewall Inn. The police raided the bar to ensure that people were wearing an appropriate amount of clothing that was assigned to their gender. If a person was not wearing enough or was wearing clothing corresponding to another gender, they would be charged with cross-dressing and arrested. This led to trans people of color protesting in the streets, and Marsha P. Johnson has been attributed to throwing one of the first stones at the police, along with Sylvia Rivera. The Stonewall riots are largely considered to be the catalyst that propelled the gay rights movement in America into media awareness and prominence. The Transgender Day of Remembrance occurs every year on November 20th and was founded in 1999 to remember all transgender people, especially trans women of color, who were murdered over the previous year. And finally, The Diagnostic Statistical Manual is a handbook that helps therapists and psychologists diagnose mental illness. Although homosexuality was delisted in the 1970s, gender dysphoria remains a diagnosis that transgender people can get from mental health evaluators. Gender dysphoria is an experience that people have when they dissociate or are made extremely uncomfortable by the sex that they were assigned at birth. There is a silver lining to dysphoria being listed. This means that insurance companies occasionally will pay to alleviate dysphoria via gender confirmation surgery. However, this is not guaranteed, and unfortunately, sometimes gender dysphoria is considered a pre-existing condition, which bars people from buying insurance. Moving on from history, let's look at the gender unicorn. This is a way of helping you conceptualize some of the different ways in which people identify. The first box is gender identity, or how someone feels about their own gender. The second box is gender expression and presentation, or how someone represents themselves to the world. The third box is the sex that someone was assigned at birth, which we have already established is complicated. The fourth box is who someone is sexually attracted to, or who they want to have sex with. The fifth box is who someone is romantically attracted to, or who someone wants to be romantic with. A link to the gender unicorn can be found on our website, where you can fill out your very own, and an example gender unicorn is displayed on screen. Next, just to reiterate, this is a Venn diagram of how gender identity and expression are related to biological sex and sexual orientation. Please note, they do not intersect. This is because gender identity, biological sex, and sexual orientation are not correlative. Any person can self-identify in whatever ways they deem most appropriate. Now, I invite you to watch a video from Chronicle of Higher Education. The link is listed on our website. Think about what the students in this video are saying, and after the video, take some time to discuss it. Think about how these students have shared their lived experience with everyone on the internet and why they might have done it. Was it to bring awareness to a community of people who are not often discussed? Was it because they want change at their particular college? Or is there a different goal here? Please pause this video and watch the Chronicle of Higher Ed clip, then come back after you've had a chance for discussion. Let's take a look at some Wyoming policies. We talked about some of these in LGB 101, but these pertain more explicitly to trans people living in Wyoming. To obtain a legal name change in Wyoming, an applicant must submit a petition to the court. The applicant must publish notice in a newspaper once a week for a required period, and that required period and in which newspaper is up to each county. Obviously, this could put someone at risk, especially if they have family that aren't aware that they're transgender. Right now, there is no way to change one's name and gender marker on a driver's license without documentation from a physician certifying completion of all operations necessary to effect a change of sex. A good number of transgender people either do not want or cannot afford to complete any kind of gender reassignment surgery. To require that all operations are complete is also not practical. Gender affirmation surgery is not covered under Medicaid. It is unclear one of the more typical first steps of transition, hormone therapy, is covered under Medicaid in Wyoming or not. There is also no state ban on conversion or reparation therapy, the process of teaching LGBTQ people to not be LGBTQ. If you remember from the myth-busting part of LGB 101, this therapy does not work and medical professionals disavow it. Further, in Wyoming, there is no state hate crimes law. Wyoming uses the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2010, which is very broad in its provisions and very difficult to enforce. There are no laws that discriminate against LGBTQ youth in Wyoming, such as a K-12 version of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but there are also no laws that actively protect LGBTQ youth, like gender-neutral bathroom policy. There is only one city, the city of Laramie, that has an active non-discrimination ordinance, and 4 other cities have non-binding non-discrimination resolutions. Lastly, high school sex ed is not mandatory at the state level. It is a county-by-county decision. Now that you know some Wyoming policy, let's talk a little about what you might say if someone comes out to you as trans. We've discussed some of this before in LGB 101, so some of it may be familiar to you, but that just means you're getting more practice, which is always good. So let's start with what not to say. First, I'll always see you as a son, a daughter, a brother, a sister. This is unnecessary because although the intent is to say that you will always love that person, the statement is invalidating who they are. You are telling the person that you care about that their gender will never be legitimate in your eyes, even if that's not how you mean it. Next, you probably shouldn't ask personal questions about the person's body, surgery, or sex life. Of course, it depends on your relationship with that person, but those questions are very personal. Think about if a stranger or someone in a class that you were with came up to you and started asking you questions about your body, surgery, or sex life. That would be pretty weird, right? Trans people are people and would be made just as uncomfortable by inappropriate questions as anybody else. Another thing that is really not cool to say is you'll never be able to have kids. First, adoption is a perfectly valid way of having a family. And second, many trans people can and do have their own biological children. Sometimes the most hurtful thing to say is you'll never be a real man or woman. This is particularly hurtful because of how invalidating it is. The person is a real man or woman because this person identifies as a man or as a woman, the same as other men and women. The only way that someone isn't a man or woman is if they identify as neither gender, and then that's their choice. You choosing to not see them as a real man or woman is neither relevant nor appropriate. And lastly, running to tell anyone else is a definite do not. That can put a trans person's life and safety at risk. Never, ever, ever, ever out a trans person without their explicit permission. Here are some alternative statements you can use. Thank you for trusting me. You're validating their decision to trust you. What do you want from me in terms of support? This helps you know what kind of reaction they're hoping for from you. Do they want someone to help them research trans-friendly doctors? Do they want someone to walk with them to the bathroom so they don't get harassed? Or do they just want someone to talk to? Who else knows is a really important question to ask. A variation on this is, where are you out? Some people in the LGBT community are only out at home, but in the closet at work. Ask both and make sure you don't accidentally out them in a public place. And lastly, do you want any resources or have you any that you want me to read, watch, or understand? If they come to you as a source for information, make sure to have something on hand. A Trevor Project brochure or a link to Wyoming Equality. Alternatively, they may have something that helps them realize that they are trans, and they want you to understand that this book, this song, or this image, that is how they perceive themselves. To share that with you is incredibly vulnerable, so respect that. So now what? What else? What can we do in our daily lives? One of the most important things to do is that we continue to educate ourselves and others. There are thousands of resources that can help you better understand people's experiences that are different than your own. This is a really important way, and a really easy way, to help yourself be more inclusive. And then we can use inclusive language. Respect people's pronouns. This means asking people what pronouns they use and sticking to them. Using they pronouns for people you haven't met. It means using names that people tell us to use and respecting when and where people want us to use those names and pronouns. Next, we can and should refuse to tolerate isms and phobias. This means not letting things that are offensive, even things like jokes, go in your presence. Don't tolerate it. We should be willing to discuss sexual orientation and gender identity issues as well. If someone has a concern, you should try to make yourself available to talk to them about what they're having trouble with. If it's beyond your level of expertise, send them in the direction of resources, which we will cover at the end of this video. And lastly, don't assume someone's sexuality or gender. You can't know someone's sexuality or gender if they don't tell you. And if it's really that important to you, you can certainly ask. If there are any other ideas for what you can do. Pause the video now and have a discussion on them. Let's close with some resources within Wyoming and nationally. First is the Trans Lifeline. This is a hotline for someone who is questioning their gender identity or someone who is transgender and experiencing a crisis. Their website explicitly says, "Our hotline is staffed by the true experts on transgender experience, transgender people themselves. Our volunteers are all trans-identified and educated in the range of difficulties transgender people experience. Our volunteers are dedicated to improving the lives of transgender people." Next, the National Center for Transgender Equality is a nonprofit working to better the lives of transgender people through legislation and advocacy. They have two major projects, the Trans Legal Services Network and the Racial and Economic Justice Initiative. Both of these projects are comprehensive and full of information for someone looking for help on a variety of issues. Next, TYES, or Trans Youth Education and Support of Colorado, says its purpose is to empower and support families and caregivers of gender-expansive youth by providing resources, education, outreach, and advocacy in order to create supportive environments that allow youth to experience the joy of authenticity. They also list medical providers of trans-inclusive care for youth in Colorado. Next, the Trevor Project is a network designed to help at-risk or questioning LGBTQ youth. They have a phone line that operates 24/7, but they also have texting and web chat options on their website if phones aren't your thing. Next, Wyoming Equality is the largest LGBTQ advocacy entity in the state of Wyoming. They organize events, do writing campaigns, and provide resources for anyone looking for information on LGBTQ events and actions in the state. Next, ACLU of Wyoming is this state's particular branch of the American Civil Liberties Union. They work to protect people from discrimination and abuse and work to uphold their civil rights. Finally, let's close with two resources at the University of Wyoming that do LGBTQ work. The first is the Rainbow Resource Center. It operates as a safe space for LGBTQ students to be in during the semester and has computers, a library, and a gender-neutral bathroom. Spectrum is the LGBTQ-friendly student organization at the University of Wyoming. They organize events, work with Safe Zone and Rainbow Resource Center on projects, and provide a network for LGBTQ students and allies. If you have any questions, please email safezone@uwyo.edu.